July 8th, 1938. We're at Reuben's restaurant on 59th Street in midtown Manhattan. Sitting at a table near us are Orson Welles and John Houseman. They've been here for 17 hours, working tirelessly on a script. In late June, Orson Welles was approached by CBS. He was offered a 1-hour network-sustained time slot on Mondays at 9 p.m. William S. Paley's concept? A Mercury Theater of the air for a 9-week trial run. Unlike Welles and Houseman's theater productions, which had several weeks of rehearsal, this show would begin in just 2 on July 11th. That on-air deadline is now just 3 days away. There's an additional catch. Their work together in the theater has to continue without letup. John Houseman is nervous. He's never done anything on radio. Orson Welles is reassuring him. Welles will be the director, narrator, and the star. The theater troupe will be heard in supporting roles. Bernard Hermann is musical director, and Davidson Taylor is supervisor. The title of this program will be First Person Singular because, as Welles told Radio Guide, the I is more important in radio than in any other creative medium. As narrator, he'll lead the audience straight into the story, where they will experience it almost as participants. A take on Bram Stoker's Dracula has been selected for the first episode. Welles started the adaptation process by marking key passages in the book for inclusion. Now, after 3/4 of a day of straight writing, filled with arguments, torn up paper, half-eaten sandwiches, cigarette butts, coffee grinds, and an empty whiskey bottle, the two men are almost done. The listening audience will never know just how hectic and down to the wire this production will consistently be.
The Columbia Network takes pride in presenting Orson Welles in the first production of a unique new summer series by the Mercury Theater on the Air. In a single year, the first in the life of the Mercury Theater, Orson Welles has come to be the most famous name of our time in American drama. Says Collier's Magazine,
23-year-old Orson Welles threw a bombshell into Broadway.
Robert Benchley writes in The New Yorker,
The production of the Mercury is, I should say, just about perfect.
Time Magazine declares,
The brightest moon that has risen over Broadway in years. Welles should feel at home in the sky, for the sky is the only limit which his ambitions recognize.
And finally, the United Press remarks,
Meteoric rise of Orson Welles' Mercury Theater continues unabated.
with 4 hit shows in its first year, the Mercury might well close its door on a season unparalleled in Broadway history. But Mr. Welles has long been working on a project for a greater audience, the Broadways of the entire United States. The Columbia Network is proud to give Orson Welles the opportunity to bring to the air those same qualities of vitality and imagination that have made him the most talked-of theatrical director in America today. And it is this project which Columbia brings you this summer, the first time in its history that radio has ever extended such an invitation to an entire theatrical institution. But here is Orson Welles himself to tell you about it. The director of the Mercury Theater, the star and producer of these programs, Orson Welles.
Good evening. We're starting off tonight with the best story of its kind ever written. You will find it in every representative library of classic English narratives. It is Bram Stoker's Dracula. The next time I speak to you, I am Dr. Arthur Seward. George Goulouris plays Jonathan Harker, and Martin Gable plays Dr. Van Helsing. It is Dr. Seward who tells the story, and so for the moment, goodbye, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you in Transylvania.
The Mercury Theater on the Air presents Orson Welles as Count Dracula in his own version of...
Welles and Houseman had total creative control. The premiere set the tone. Wells played Dracula with a cutting effect. The press was solid in its praise of him, the production, and the supporting cast of Martin Gable, Ray Collins, Agnes Moorehead, and other members of the Mercury troupe. Over the next 9 weeks, listeners heard adaptations of classics like Treasure Island, A Tale of Two Cities, Abraham Lincoln, The 39 Steps, The Man Who Was Thursday, The Affairs of Anatole, and The Count of Monte Cristo, for which Wells simulated the sound of a dungeon by having the two actors record their scene from the floor of the CBS restroom, placing 2 dynamic microphones against the bases of the toilet seat in order to achieve realistic subterranean reverberations. Each time the toilet was flushed, it gave the appearance of waves breaking against nearby rocks.
Get on board. Heave up there!
I sat in the stern sheets with a guard on each side of me in the little boat.
There! King's business! Lower the chain!
The chain that closes the mouth of the port at night was lowered. Soon we were outside the harbor. My first feeling was one of joy at breathing the fine sea air again, then of sadness as I saw the lights of La Reserve away to the left of me and heard the sound of voices and music coming through the open windows.
This Monday night concludes the summer broadcasts, which have introduced the Mercury Theater as the first complete theatrical producing company in radio. But the tremendous response which their efforts have drawn from all parts of the country has ensured their continuance with us through the coming months. The Columbia Broadcasting System is therefore proud to announce a new series of weekly productions by Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air, beginning next Sunday evening, September the 11th, from 8 to 9 o'clock Eastern Daylight Saving Time.
The years of connections and experience had led Orson Welles to this point. He learned in Dublin how to sell himself into a starring role. He learned from his mentor Roger Hill how to illustrate a story both literally and figuratively for an eager audience. He learned from Catherine Cornell the subtle art of leading a performance troupe. He learned from Irving Reese how to push sound production and how to treat radio drama as present tense theater. William S. Paley enjoyed the productions enough that after September 5th, 1938, he renewed the series under a new name, the Mercury Theater of the Air, and moved the show to the biggest primetime slot in radio, Sundays at 8 p.m., opposite of NBC's The Chase and Sanborn Hour, setting the stage for a series of events which would follow that would forever alter the course of American radio drama.
Well, I remember that along with 3 or 4 other members of the cast who had parts in the first act, going into the newsroom and seeing all the boards lit up. Nobody was there. The girls had all gone home, and we picked up the phones. And it was shocking to hear what they said to us and how they yelled at us and cursed at us. And our argument was, well, why don't you tune in some others? You find out that this is not all over America. This is not all over New York. There's no monsters outside from Mars. For God's sake, wait till the second half of the show. And then finally someone got in touch with Paley and said, my God, the studio is going crazy. The whole city of New York is up in arms. In Harlem, people were jumping out of windows. And that's the thing that, I felt badly about. And cars, for some reason, along the Pulaski Skyway in Jersey City, cars were going 75 miles an hour in traffic.
I was on one of the phones at CBS when Orson Welles had his War of the Worlds thing, and everybody was at a phone. It was frantic. So believable. They were frightened, really frightened people were calling. But it certainly caused a lot of new directions in the radio business. They had to be informed if there was any even remote possibility of anybody getting frightened that this was a radio broadcast and was not real,
I think that when we got back to the theater and he saw his wife was in the show and all of his actors, he was a little bit leery about what was going to happen. Houseman, his partner, said it was a Halloween trick. Well, it wasn't a Halloween trick. It was done in dead seriousness. It wasn't meant as a trick at all. Because of the situation in Europe, that there was a very nervous thing. During the broadcast, I saw a bunch of policemen in the foyer outside of the door to the studio. I thought, I don't think he's being scared into this. I think he's worried that there's going to be an uprising. Well, there wasn't. There were people that got into their cars and drove, but I don't know whether they were going to drive. Where were you going to drive to get away from the Martian?
Monday, October 24th, 1938. We're sitting next to Howard Koch as he drives back to New York through New Jersey after visiting his parents on his day off. Who is Howard Koch? Well, early in the autumn season of the Mercury Theater on the air, the adaptation process got to be too much for John Houseman. He was forced to condense large Victorian novels into 60-minute radio dramas in 3 working days each week. The first Sunday evening adaptation was Julius Caesar on September 11th. That was followed by Jane Eyre, Sherlock Holmes, and Oliver Twist. Around this time, Howard Koch walked into Houseman's office and asked him for a writing job. Houseman hired him on the spot for $75 a week, grateful to turn the script writing duties over. Koch's first script was an adaptation of Hell on Ice, which aired on October 9th. It was from a book by Edward Ellsberg about the disastrous attempt by George W. DeLong to reach the North Pole in 1879. The story told how DeLong's ship, the Jeannette, was trapped in an ice pack. Only a handful of men survived, enduring horrendous conditions for nearly 2 years.
On February 25th, after 6 months in the ice, the Jeannette's position was 74 degrees 11 minutes north. We were still drifting, waiting for the thaw to free us. March 5th, first glimpse of sunshine.
The following 2 shows were adaptations of Tarkington's 17 and Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days, which aired last night. Orson Welles wants a spook show, something appropriate for Halloween. He's decided to dust off H.G. Wells' 40-year-old science fiction fantasy, The War of the Worlds. Koch is worried. The narrative tone is hopelessly dated, but he has his assignment. Orson has given him some general guidelines. He wants the story to be told in a series of news bulletins with cutaways to first-person narrative. This won't be any cutting job, though. Koch will have to write the entire story over as a modern tale. He's only got 6 days to do it. On his way home, he stops to pick up a road map. It's now Tuesday the 25th. We're back at Howard Koch's New York apartment. He's opening the map. Koch closes his eyes and drops his pencil. It's landed in a village called Grover's Mill in New Jersey. This will be where the Martians land. Next, he's telephoning John Houseman direct. He needs some help. Houseman agrees to come over and work on the script with him. It's now 2 a.m. on the morning of Wednesday the 26th. Houseman has finally arrived. Howard Koch is in better spirits. He's starting to have fun with the script, laying waste to the entire state of New Jersey. He's especially enjoying getting to destroy CBS. Houseman and Koch will work through the night and all through the day until Wednesday at dusk. Orson Welles is busy rehearsing a Broadway play, Danton's Death, and is unavailable. On Thursday, the rest of the cast gets their first rehearsal, led by Welles' associate Paul Stewart. Everyone felt it was a flop. It played too dull and needed more spark. Houseman and Koch got together and plunged in again. They worked all night, spicing it with circumstantial allusions and authentic detail. Eventually, they ran out of time. On Friday evening, the script was in the hands of the CBS censor and Orson himself. The only censor requests were to change the Hotel Biltmore to a fictional Meridian room of the Hotel Park Plaza in downtown New York, and to change any CBS references to a generic broadcast building. Sunday, October 30th, the afternoon of the broadcast, Orson Welles has finally made an appearance at rehearsal, taking over for Paul Stewart, beginning to edit the broadcast script into one of his style of elocution. A strange fever is taking over the studio. The first to feel it are the actors. They know they're about to attempt something never before done. Frank Reddick, who will play the soon-to-be incinerated newsman Carl Phillips, is studying the transcriptions of Herb Morrison's Hindenburg disaster. He wants to capture the authenticity of Morrison's voice. Welles is putting longer cutaways back into the script. He wants the elongated tension of dance music scenes to force the audience to wonder what's happening. He feels the tedium of the first portion of the show will add to the believability of the later portions. Men will travel large distances. Cabinet meetings will be held. Savage battles will be fought in the air and on land. They are ready. It's now 8 p.m. Welles has mounted the podium, assuming the stance of both director and star. It's time to go on the air.
Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Ladies and gentlemen, the director of the Mercury Theater and star of these broadcasts, Orson Welles.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own. We know now that as human beings busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space. Yet across an immense ethereal gulf, minds that are to our minds as ours are to the beasts in the jungle, intellects, vast, cool, and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. In the 39th year of the 20th century came the Great Disillusionment. Near the end of October, business was better. The war scare was over. More men were back at work. Sales were picking up. On this particular evening, October 30th, the Crosley service estimated that 32 million people were listening in on radios.
In order to understand why the War of the Worlds had the effect it did, one must understand what the network radio landscape was that evening. Running opposite of the Mercury Theater on NBC Red was one of radio's most popular shows, The Chase and Sanborn Hour. The show was hosted by Don Amici and featured starring musical numbers from Nelson Eddy, along with Dorothy Lamour, and comedy from one of the most popular entertainers of the era, Edgar Bergen, with his ventriloquist dummy Charlie McCarthy. On that evening, the guest was English actress Madeline Carroll, who that previous summer had starred opposite Henry Fonda in Blockade. Many listeners missed the opening introductions of the Mercury Theater, identifying the show as an adaptation of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, because they were too busy listening to Nelson Eddy's opening music number on the Chase and Sanborn Hour. In fact, many still missed the back-and-forth bulletins, but opposite the Chase and Sanborn Hour's commercial and guest drama scene was the portion of the War of the Worlds after the Martians landed and the capsule was finally opened. This was when many in America tuned their dial to CBS.
Ladies and gentlemen, am I on? Ladies and gentlemen, here I am, back of a stone wall that adjoins Mr. Wilmer's garden. From here, I get a sweep of the whole scene. I'll give you every detail as long as I can talk and as long as I can see. More state police have arrived. They're drawing up a cordon in front of the pit. About 30 of them. No need to push the crowd back now. They're willing to keep their distance. The captain's conferring with someone. Can't quite see who. Oh, yes, I believe it's Professor Pearson. Yes, it is. Now they've parted, and the professor moves around one side, studying the object, while the captain and two policemen advance with something in their hands. I can see it now. It's a white handkerchief tied to a pole. Flag of truce. If those creatures know what that means, what anything means. Wait a minute, something's happening. Humped shape is rising out of the pit. I can make out a small beam of light against a mirror. What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror, and it leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on. Lord, they're turning into flames. Now the whole field's caught up by the woods, the barns, the gas tanks of the automobiles spreading everywhere. It's coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill. Evidently, there's some difficulty with our field transmission. However, we will return to that point at the earliest opportunity. In the meantime, we have a late bulletin from San Diego, California. Professor Indelkoffer, speaking at a dinner of the California Astronomical Society, expressed the opinion that the explosions on Mars are undoubtedly nothing more than severe volcanic disturbances on the surface of the planet. We continue now with our piano interlude.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been handed a message that came in from Grover's Mill by telephone. Just one moment, please. At least 40 people, including 6 state troopers, lie dead in a field east of the village of Grover's Mill, their bodies burned and distorted beyond all possible recognition. The next voice you hear will be that of Brigadier General Montgomery Smith, commander of the state militia at Trenton, New Jersey.
I have been requested by the governor of New Jersey to place the counties of Mercer and Middlesex as far west as Princeton and east to Jamesburg under martial law. No one will be permitted to enter this area except by special pass issued by state or military authorities. 4 companies of state militia are proceeding from Trenton to Grover's Mill and will aid in the evacuation of homes within the range of military operations. Thank you.
You have just been listening to General Montgomery Smith, commanding the state militia at Trenton. In the meantime, further details of the catastrophe at Grover's Mill are coming in. The strange creatures, after unleashing their deadly assault, crawled back in their pit and made no attempt to prevent the efforts of the firemen to recover the bodies and extinguish the fire. The combined fire departments of Mercer County are fighting the flames which menace the entire countryside. We have been unable to establish any contact with our mobile unit at Grover's Mill, but we hope to be able to return you there at the earliest possible moment. In the meantime, we take you to... Just one moment, please. Ladies and gentlemen, I have just been informed that we have finally established communication with an eyewitness of the tragedy. Professor Pearson has been located at a farmhouse near Grover's Mill, where he has established an emergency observation post. As a scientist, he will give you his explanation of the calamity. The next voice you hear will be that of Professor Pearson, brought to you by direct wire. Professor Pearson.
Of the creatures in the rocket cylinder at Grover's Mill, I can give you no authoritative information, either as to their nature, their origin, or their purposes here on Earth. Of their destructive instrument, I might venture some conjectural explanation. For want of a better term, I shall refer to the mysterious weapon as a heat ray. It's all too evident that these creatures have scientific knowledge far in advance of our own. It's my guess that in some way they are able to generate an intense heat in a chamber of practically absolute non-conductivity. This intense heat they project in a parallel beam against any object they choose by means of a polished parabolic mirror of unknown composition, much as the mirror of a lighthouse projects a beam of light. That is my conjecture of the origin of the heat ray.
Thank you, Professor Pearson. Ladies and gentlemen, here is a bulletin from Trenton. It is a brief statement informing us that the charred body of Carl Phillips has been identified in a Trenton hospital. Now, here's another bulletin from Washington, D.C. The Office of the Director of the National Red Cross reports 10 units of Red Cross emergency workers have been assigned to the headquarters of the state militia, stationed outside of Grover's Mill, New Jersey. Here's a bulletin from State Police, Princeton Junction. The fires at Grover's Mill and vicinity are now under control. Scouts report all quiet in the pit, and there is no sign of life appearing from the mouth of the cylinder.
Imagine that you had tuned into this broadcast directly at this moment. For the previous 10 minutes, I've been giving you the play-by-play of Howard Koch's week. That previous Monday, on the 24th, Adolf Hitler sent his foreign minister to Poland to demand Poland capitulate and give the free city of Danzig back to Germany. On Tuesday the 25th, the Chinese city of Hankou fell to the Japanese. On Thursday the 27th, the Nazis began arresting Jews with Polish citizenship with the intention of deporting them back to Poland. The next day, some 12,000 Polish Jews were deported from Germany. Many of the expelled Jews were denied entry into Poland on the basis of the country's new denaturalization law. Some went back to Germany, and about 5,500 wound up staying in disused states and other temporary shelters on the border with nowhere else to go. That same day, 5 acres of the shopping and hotel district in Marseille burned to the ground. Almost 100 perished in the blaze. And on Saturday, October 29th, all opposition parties were banned in Romania. It wasn't so much that our American relatives of 80 years ago were gullible. Americans on October 30th, 1938 were on high alert. War was just around the corner. Although many in America knew Orson Welles' voice, after all, they'd been listening to him regularly for 3 years. The believability of the production, the timing of the people switching dials, and the state of the world created a perfect storm.
Now the smoke's spreading faster. It's reached Times Square. People are trying to run away from it, but it's no use. They're falling like flies. Now the smoke's crossing 6th Avenue, 5th Avenue, 100 yards away. It's 50 feet.
Calling CQ. 2X2L calling CQ. 2X2L calling CQ, New York. Is there anyone on the air? Is there anyone on the air? Isn't there anyone? 2X2L. Is there anyone on the air? Is there anyone on the air? Isn't there anyone?
You are listening to a CBS presentation of Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air in an original dramatization of The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. The performance will continue after a brief intermission. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System. The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, starring Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air.
40-minute mark of the broadcast, pandemonium had broken out in CBS's Madison Avenue studios. At this intermission point, listeners were finally cued in that this was a dramatization spearheaded by Orson Welles in the Mercury Theater. They had been deceived. At the end of the play, the Martians were defeated, though not by man's hands, but by the diseases of the Earth's atmosphere. When the final curtain closed, Welles took to the air.
This is Orson Welles, ladies and gentlemen, out of character, to assure you that the War of the Worlds has no further significance than as the holiday offering it was intended to be. The Mercury Theater's own radio version of dressing up in a sheet and jumping out of a bush and saying boo. Starting now, we couldn't soap all your windows and steal all your garden gates by tomorrow night, so we did the best next thing. We annihilated the world before your very ears and utterly destroyed the CBS. You will be relieved, I hope, to learn that we didn't mean it, and that both institutions are still open for business. So goodbye, everybody, and remember, please, for the next day or so, the terrible lesson you learned tonight. That grinning, glowing, globular invader of your living room is an inhabitant of the pumpkin patch, and if your doorbell rings and nobody's there, that was no Martian, it's Halloween.
Tonight, the Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations...
But America didn't think this was funny. The next morning, in front of reporters, news cameras, and radio microphones, Orson Welles issued an explanation and public apology, while fielding questions.
Quiet. You want me to speak now? I'm sorry. Of course, we are deeply shocked and deeply regretful about the results of last night's broadcast. The date of the broadcast was 1939, and it came rather as a great surprise to us that a story, fine H.G. Wells' classic fantasy, the original for so many succeeding comic strips and adventure stories and novels, about a mythical invasion by monsters from the planet Mars should have had so profound an effect upon radio listeners. Seemed to us to be clearly in the realm of the fairy tale. Deeply regretful that this is not so.
Welles was publicly remorseful. But just 1 month later, the Mercury Theater of the Air drew to a close. Not because it was canceled. Because, thanks to their ruse, they had found a sponsor.